I was fragile, recovering from major surgery, when my husband began an affair with my own sister right under my roof. He was betraying our marriage, and together, they plotted a slow-motion heist to seize half of the multi-million-dollar business I built from scratch. They thought they were clever, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But while they were whispering sweet nothings, I was laying an irreversible trap. I took back my company, my future, and ensured they were left with nothing but the devastating wreckage of their own greed. They're ruined, and I'm free. But my family is destroyed. AITA for making sure they paid the highest possible price? The business, a high-end, custom software solution firm, was my baby. I started it in a cramped apartment 10 years ago and built it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. My husband, James, joined a few years in, taking the title of VP of Operations. While he was good at the logistics and the front-facing leadership role, everyone knew I was the engine, the visionary, the capital source, and the primary IP holder. We were wealthy, successful, and what I thought was a united front. Then came the necessary halt. I underwent major abdominal surgery, the kind that forces you into 6 weeks of near-total immobility and a cocktail of strong painkillers. I was utterly vulnerable, relying on James for everything from food to basic movement. To help manage the household and, crucially, to keep the light work going, I asked my younger sister, Chloe, to move in. Chloe was between jobs and family, so it seemed like a perfect, safe arrangement. I trusted them both completely. Initially, everything was fine. Chloe was attentive, and James was the picture of the worried, supportive husband. But as the strong painkillers faded, my mental fog lifted, and I started noticing the silence. Too much silence. James and Chloe would whisper intensely in the kitchen when they thought I was napping. They stopped visiting my room together, and when they did, their conversation felt forced and overly formal. And James became obsessed with paper. He'd bring contracts and corporate documents, insisting I sign them immediately, even when I was clearly drowsy, muttering things about finalizing the Q4 strategy before the board meeting. He was insistent, almost aggressive, about me signing documents without reading them, assuring me they were just routine adjustments. One afternoon, about 4 weeks into my recovery, I woke up early from a nap. The house was quiet. I heard a low murmur coming from James's home office downstairs. I slid myself out of bed, grabbing my cane, and slowly, painfully, moved toward the top of the stairs. I was shaky and dizzy, but the instinct was overwhelming. I didn't need to hear much. The sound of muffled, intimate laughter transitioned into a clear, devastating line from James, "We just have to wait until she's fully recovered and back in the office. If I divorce her now, while she's incapacitated, my claim to 50% of the company value looks weak. We need to wait until she's stable, then file, claim irreconcilable differences, and secure the split." Chloe's voice, equally cold and calculating, followed, "And then we can finally run this place without her micromanaging every design decision. The whole thing hinges on those documents you got her to sign, right? The ones making you a true co-founder?" My world shattered. It wasn't just the betrayal, the sex under my roof while I was leaking bodily fluids and battling infection. It was the malicious, predatory timing. They were executing a business heist against me, the woman who built everything, while I was at my absolute weakest, trying to sign away my future while high on narcotics. The thought of confronting them, of throwing my limited strength into a shouting match, was immediately dismissed. It would only confirm their fears and give them time to consolidate their fraudulent position. They had shown me their cards, now it was time to play mine, silently. I retreated to my room and locked the door, heart pounding, adrenaline overriding the pain meds. They thought I was sick and stupid. They were wrong. Being a tech CEO teaches you 3 things: how to be meticulous, how to manage risk, and how to use technology to your advantage. The first step was setting the trap. Over the next 3 days, I pretended to be worse, sleeping more, and mumbling incoherently, reinforcing their belief that I was still out of it. Meanwhile, I installed a small, voice-activated recorder I already owned in a discreet spot in my home office and another in the kitchen, focusing on areas where I'd heard them conferring. Crucially, I installed a remote keylogger on the shared desktop computer James used to manage operations, the desktop he never bothered to secure because he thought I was too sick to notice. The second step was securing my assets. I remotely contacted my corporate counsel, not our firm's lawyer, but my personal one, a sharp woman named Eleanor. I asked Eleanor for an urgent, confidential consultation, claiming I was planning for succession and asset protection against a prolonged health issue. I sent her the recordings I'd already captured, mostly romantic whispers, but enough to establish the affair, and the screenshots from the keylogger that showed James researching divorce law and corporate bylaws. Eleanor was brilliant. Under the guise of streamlining corporate efficiency, she drafted new governance documents. James, arrogant and confident in his pending victory, signed the new papers I put in front of him without reading the fine print. These documents, which he assumed solidified his 50% claim, actually contained complex clauses allowing for the buyback and annulment of a partner's shares if they were found to have committed gross negligence or moral turpitude leading to demonstrable conflict of interest against the company. It was a poison pill, and he swallowed it whole. I also ensured that I, as the primary IP owner, transferred all original codebase and core algorithms into a separate, untraceable trust. I waited until my surgeon cleared me to return to work, fully recovered and legally sound. The wait was torture, but the performance was necessary. The moment I got the final clearance, the game was over. I called an urgent, mandatory board meeting at the company headquarters. Present were myself, James, Chloe, who I had, with sickening politeness, asked to attend as James's assistant, Eleanor, and the CFO. James and Chloe walked in, radiating smug confidence. They expected a pep talk before James made his final power move. I didn't let them speak. Eleanor stood up and presented a folder. Ms., my last name, is regretfully announcing changes to the company's leadership and ownership structure, effective immediately. James started to protest. Now hold on, Emma, you can't make solo decisions. I own. Eleanor cut him off. Mr., my last name, your stake in the company has been reduced to 0 shares, and your employment is terminated for cause. The reason is twofold: gross negligence in fiduciary duty and the misuse of company resources, which constitutes a severe conflict of interest. She then played the first audio recording, the conversation between James and Chloe detailing their plan to wait for my recovery before seizing the business. The sound quality was perfect. The air left the room. James was white, Chloe sank into her chair, her eyes wide with shock. Eleanor then pulled out documents detailing James's fraudulent expense reports and unauthorized use of company assets, which I'd found via the keylogger and his company email, sealing his termination for cause, which negated any severance or stock options. I finally spoke, my voice steady but icy. You didn't just cheat on me, James. You tried to orchestrate a financial takeover while I was helpless, using my own sister as your accomplice. You are not getting 50% of my company. You are getting escorted out of the building. Chloe, you are no longer welcome in my house, my life, or my family. Your betrayal of blood is unforgivable. James exploded, screaming about the unfairness and the recordings being illegal. They weren't, in our state's specific context, because the conversations occurred in a shared living space without an expectation of privacy, which Eleanor had confirmed. He left with nothing but a box of personal effects and a tarnished reputation that guaranteed he wouldn't find a similar executive role again. Chloe was left with nowhere to go. She had burned her bridges with me for a man who instantly blamed her for the failure of the plot. They were financially and socially ruined. I kept my company and my sanity, but I lost my husband, my sister, and the innocence of ever trusting my family again. The revenge was absolute, calculated, and legally flawless. But sometimes, when I sit alone in my house, the silence is deafening. I stripped 2 people bare, taking their future in a single, devastating move. AITA for making sure their greed cost them everything?